Why are Welsh landlords leaving the housing market? It's something that we get asked all the time. In fact, every week here at Morgan Real Estate, I get asked by sellers, is it now a good time to sell my rental property? Or I've got a rental portfolio that I want to offload and thinking of selling, what's the best way to do it? For us, we've been fortunate that we've had great success using the modern method of auction, secure sale option. It's become a really popular option with landlords. What we find is that we have a very high success rate in the high 90s through sale to completion. There's no selling fees, which is a big bonus, but more importantly, you get your buyers tied in. Immediately the offer is accepted, they're paying a deposit, and we know that we're up to 56 days for completion, which is a lot better than the national average of obviously nearly 5 months. That said, why are landlords looking to sell? Maybe you are a landlord, maybe you're thinking of selling yourself, wondering is now the right time? Are there still people buying investment properties? Well, the fact of the matter is that small-time landlords have been pushed out to the market. We're seeing professional landlords and property firms buying a lot of buy-to-lets. Demand is difficult. There's not a lot of rental properties available. As we said, a lot of landlords are selling. In fact, 250,000 properties, it's estimated last year, came to the market to sell that were ex-rentals. That's a huge amount of properties that now are maybe not available in the rental market. That, on top of the current stats, show that Q1 in 2026 was actually one of the worst performing markets for rental properties. Supply was at a high. There was over 15% more properties available this quarter than last year, but demand was down almost 20%. Now that's a big swing. So what does it mean for rent here in South Wales? Well, rent has still continued to increase month on month, quarter on quarter. We had that explosion during COVID where house prices and house rents surged, and that hasn't slowed down. What is now slowing down is affordability. As we know, for landlords, if you're a landlord yourself, cost of insurance, cost of licensing, that's increased. Interest rates have obviously gone up, and then there's the cost for tenants. We're looking at the cost of living. That's always in crisis, it seems. So there's consistent pressure on landlords and consistent pressure on tenants. The pressure on landlords is to continue to pay the mortgage, and the pressure on tenants is to be able to afford the rent to pay the mortgage. So what I'm going to try and do over the next few minutes is give you an indication as to why that might be, if you're thinking of selling, what your options are. Here in Wales, we have Rent Smart Wales, that's our governing body, and we are one of the most heavily regulated areas within the UK for rental properties. And as we know, with regulation comes cost. The Rent in Home Wales Act came in 2022, 1st of December, and it revolutionised the way that the rental market was run. There was a lot of changes, and it was the biggest change in rental law in over a decade. The big shift that we've seen of late is that ASTs, which everybody was so familiar with, have now become occupational contracts. Notices have changed, and the way in which we manage properties has also changed, making it inherently difficult for small landlords or self-managing landlords not only to keep up with the rate of change, but also the expense of change. Gas certificates, electrical certificates must obviously be provided as well as so much legislation that is also daunting if you're looking to get into property. The big piece that has come to us, and we see a lot, is that a lot of landlords are now unable to afford the maintenance costs. With the Fit for Habitation clause that's come in, this is a really important piece to factor in, along with EPC scorings. It's estimated that an average landlord in Wales will have to spend almost £10,000 by 2029 in order to ensure that their rental property is compliant. Since 2015, we've been governed by Rent Smart Wales, and you must be registered as a landlord. What we've seen is still a phenomenal amount of people who've rented privately, to family, to friends that aren't registered. They're now looking to bring those properties to market with tenants in situ. It's becoming a difficult point. You must be compliant, you must be signed on the register, or you must vacate the property. The problem comes if you don't have an occupational contract. It's very difficult to serve notice, it's difficult to get possession of your property. So what can you do? We're finding landlords are leaning towards selling the property with us at auction, almost on a sold as seen basis. Now, there are property companies out there that will buy distressed properties, properties that are unable to be, continue to let, and that is a really big driver for a lot of people. What we're seeing is a lot of people are just unable to continue managing the property. Cost is unaffordable, they're having problems, or they don't have the funds in order to refurb it and keep it compliant. So, the only option comes to sale. Putting it on for private treaty causes no end of problems because it's a long, drawn-out process with no guarantee that you're going to sell the property at the end of it. Since 2020, landlords are now unable to deduct the cost of mortgage interest from their tax. This has made a big difference, as 20% almost of your income is now taxable, as before in 2020 it wasn't. This means that the hardest hit landlords are the accidental landlords, the landlords that inherit one property, or we call them accidental landlords because you may have met somebody and moved in with them. You may have inherited property from a parent that's sadly no longer with us, Or your plans may have changed. You may have moved to a different area and held on to your property. We were always told as children and younger persons that in order to buy a property and keep hold of it was a good investment. Maybe it isn't anymore. We're seeing that having a property isn't always the best option, especially if you're not local or it's not making you enough money to be able to keep some back to pay for those inevitable repairs or costs of EPC upgrades. Q1 2026, so the first quarter of this year, how did it perform? We saw that the supply for rental properties was actually up 15%. So that means despite all of the headlines, all of the news, people are still bringing properties up ready to rent. But what we did see is that the demand dropped nearly 20%. That's a huge drop, and that was put down to the increase in rents becoming unaffordable with the step up from universal credit and housing benefit. The biggest question that we get asked though is the abolishment of Section 21 and what does it mean? Well, non-fault evictions is something that a lot of landlords did use when coming to an end of a particular payment plan for properties or they're looking to offload portfolios. People often buy properties and landlords buy properties as investments. They're not always long-term, and the abolishment of Section 21 has made that inherently difficult. What we're seeing again is that landlords are putting properties to auction with tenants in situ, and the ownership and the onus of the tenancy will just pass on to the new buyer. There are professional property buyers out there that do actually look for this type of property. So there is light at the end of the tunnel for landlords who think they're stuck. So what does 2026 look like for renters? Now, we did say already that supply was up 15% and demand was down 20%. But what does that actually mean? It doesn't necessarily mean that there are no people looking for properties or that there are none available. It's simply that renters are actually being priced out of the market here in South Wales. As we touched on, the cost of interest, the cost of affordability is pushing those price of properties up, and tenants simply can't afford it. Maybe tenants are now becoming home buyers, turning to social housing. There's definitely a problem here in South Wales with the availability of affordable rental properties, and as we see, as more cost and more pressure and more government pressure is applied to landlords, selling seems to be the only option for some. As the pressure builds on landlords, what we're seeing is that the accidental landlords, the single and ones and twos owning properties, are being pushed from the market. Those landlords have provided good, affordable housing in Poplar Valley areas and town centre areas for generations. But now, as the market changes, as the demand changes for landlords to comply and continue to have to improve properties, and cost of owning properties increases, some are simply choosing to sell. And that means that we are creating our own problem here in Wales with regards to a shortage of rental properties. So some stats and facts to kind of round off this piece here is that in 2025 we saw 255,000 rental properties come for sale. That's a huge amount of properties. That's nearly 700 properties a day being listed by agents from landlords looking to exit the market. 47% of Welsh landlords said that this new pressure from government is making them decide whether they continue to become landlords or they sell their portfolio. So nearly 1 in 2 landlords is looking to offload their rental properties according to latest figures. It's estimated that by October 2030 landlords will need to spend nearly £10,000 per rental property to make them compliant with EPC standards and compliance and legislation coming in. That's a lot of money for rental properties. Tenant demand is down this year, nearly 20%. And supply of rental properties is up nearly 15%. There really may be a shortage of renters in South Wales. And Section 24, the mortgage interest rate relief being capped. That is a huge point that is now rearing its head again, especially as interest rates continue to rise. Landlords, are you thinking of exiting the market? It's a difficult time to be a landlord in Wales. With the change of government, Rent Smart Wales policies, the increasing cost of becoming a landlord may become too much. With the abolishment of Section 21, you can still sell a property through a modern method of auction or secure sale. In fact, we've sold plenty of properties this year for landlords looking to exit the market with tenants in situ, as simple as 1, 2, 3. You instruct us, you sell your property at auction, and you pay 0 fees. Get in touch on the details below and find out how you can sell your rental property with us for free.